Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar. I'm Rochelle Weir and I'm joined by Phil Slade, and we are the co-founders of Decider. So Decider, we have a grand vision about creating a better world through better decision making. So we are running a series of these webinars looking at all things humanity based, and hoping that we can share some of the insights that we've gathered. As Phil's a psychologist and a behavioral economist, and I specialize in human-centered design and learning and development. So using our expertise to share some of the things that we've learned along the way. And we hope you get some value out of this session today. So the session is going to go for about 45 minutes. It will be recorded, and we will be posting that on our YouTube channel. So feel free to subscribe to that. We'd love for you to make the most of the series and some of the other sessions that we've done previously. And I'll talk a little bit more about what is coming up in next month's session towards the end. But today, this session is all about social intelligence. So, there we go. What are we going to cover in this next session? So what I want to look through is about social intelligence. All about emotions. It's all about understanding those emotions and knowing what that means, but also understanding about societal norms. So what are all of the different things, including our identity, that make up who we are and how we interact with the world around us. And then being able to think about how all of the other people's drivers, their motivations, the thing that make them tick, as well as then going, okay, now that I understand me, I understand you, how do we better build rapport and influence?
It's probably good these are massive areas, right? We're not going to deep dive these areas in the next 45 minutes. We're going to give a high-level overview and some frameworks, some useful frameworks and tips for you to be able to go away from here and sort of start to rethink about how you look at your interpersonal relationships in a more socially intelligent way.
Absolutely. We will be sharing some links to some different surveys and documents and artifacts as well. So keep an eye on the chat channel as we go through the session. But if you have questions, please feel free to add them. We'll moderate, and hopefully either we'll cover it in the session or circle back to you after the session. So let's have a chat about social intelligence and kind of some of the fundamentals of what social intelligence is. So there's three key areas to this, that it is a complex thing. People are complex, and we're going to break that down a little. But if you think about it in the context of areas that you need to be aware of, as I said, it's about, you've really got to have a deep understanding about you and what makes you you, as well as then understanding those around you and what makes them tick and how do you interact with them. But you've also got to have this overlay of broader social context.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like you're a complex human being and I'm a complex human being, but then it's the interaction effects between us that make it a whole lot more complex. And then you put a third element into there in terms of a family social context or a work context or any sort of political context, that broader social context, the degree of complexity goes up. So however complex you think you are, because often we think we have a lot of salient sort of thoughts about who we are. Just think about the degrees of complexity that go up. And if you haven't, it's probably worth pointing out, if you haven't done the emotional intelligence webinar, after this one, it's worth diving back into that, because we're not necessarily going to touch on the emotional intelligence, which does look at understanding, managing our own emotions, which is part of social intelligence. And you really need to start with that. If you haven't got that, this is going to be really, really difficult to action in a practicable way.
Yeah, absolutely. So we want to make sure that we're going to touch on self-awareness and self-regulation, and we'll have a little bit of a look at that today, but absolutely check out the Emotional Intelligence 101 webinar on our YouTube channel for more details in that space. But today we're also going to have a bit of a look at relationship skills and things you can do to supercharge that.
So when we look at this broader social context, we like to think of, think about it in terms of you, others, and this broader social context, looking at this type of map. And I would say this is sort of a map of who you are. It's also a map of then how you interact with others, because the more that you understand yourself, the better that you'll start to understand others. And then you can look at it also on a broader social context, so culture. and the culture of different places. And we start to talk about those things in a little bit more of a tangible way, so that you can understand who you are, who you're interacting with, and what's the culture or the situation that you're sitting in, where the social norms and things like that start to get start to evidence themselves, right? So this all starts with this concept of reacting and responding. And if you've done the emotional intelligence webinar, you'll understand the science of this reacting and responding piece. And you can think of that. So you've got your own reactivity, which you'll have unconscious reactivity. You'll have unconscious reactivity in the people that you're dealing with. But then the broader context, the group norms, and as a herd instinct, you will also have a reactivity that happens at that group level as well. So we're just going to stop the cam again as we try to fix said issues. Do you want me to just keep going?
Yeah, just keep going, and I'll try and keep troubleshooting. Sorry.
So if we can go to the next slide, I'm not sure how I did that. But we're going to go to the next slide, webinar 3, which is fascinating. I love tech issues. These are really, really good. What's really nice is that at least this is a free webinar, right? No one's paying for this, so we've got a little bit of grace. We don't know why LinkedIn is not working for us at the moment. It's worked beautifully for us in the past, and it's just not working now. So that's really unfortunate. Anyway, so we have a look at this reacting side. So if you're reacting, you are often it's working on the mobile phone fine, apparently. So there we are. So for some reason we're having trouble with the web streaming service. But anyway,
treat it as a podcast. Keep going.
Yes. So anyway, so here we go. Reacting. When you're reacting, it's really good to remember. We can go deep into this, and we're not going to go deep in this. We're just going to stay at this high level and look at the worldviews, because the way that people see the world is really different depending on the groups or the lens to which you're seeing the world through. And often we talk about these worldviews as being cultural. You know, have a religious overlay, or an irreligious overlay, or a scientific overlay, or a family overlay, and we'll get into that later. But at a very fundamental level, the way that you view the world is often through the lens of how you've learned to survive growing up. Often we think once the rules you learn in puberty are the rules that you then use to navigate life beyond that. And there tends to be 3 worldviews that people develop in that time. So ways of seeing the world, ways of making sense of the world, in a way, ways to stay safe. All right, this is the safety, the core things that are going to keep you fundamentally safe. And there tends to be 3 different narratives that sit top of mind for people. So the first one is the groupie mindset. And this is all about we are safe if we are together. The strongest, more unified group wins. You imagine, running away from a predator. If the pack of animals stays together, then they're more likely to stay together. And if they fracture, then all of a sudden there's more points of attack, and we fracture as a group, we fall as a group, stronger together. And that's really the narrative. So the stronger together narrative is very strong in that groupie. And so you do things in order to not fracture the group. Now that means that you don't necessarily do the right thing. It's just that you do things that are the more harmonious things. So you're looking for harmony above all, because that's what's going to keep us safe. However, and I should say, so if you're not a groupie, often a good way to look at if another is a groupie is to look at how people are triggered. So these things are all going to, in a way, annoy people, but there's a difference between just being annoyed at it and actually really triggering someone. So a groupie is really, really triggered by other people around them being rude or hostile, in a public. And public embarrassment or undermining of themselves or someone else is a huge trigger. Another thing that we sort of see, anyone that gives credit or doesn't give credit, I should say, where credit is due, whether it's to themselves or somewhere else, it'll annoy other people, but it'll really trigger a groupie because it's seen as fracturing the group. Like, why would you do that? Why would you fracture the group and not give credit where credit is due? So that's what the groupies are doing. The purists, though, are talking about truth. So where the groupies look at the fracture of the group, and sometimes, truth can be relative, it's just your truth, our truth, whatever truth. The purists will go, there is a truth, and the truth will always win in the end. So the search for that truth, the search for the ideal, the right way of doing things, it's very important to look at that, what's right and what's wrong, and to tease that out. Whereas the groupies don't necessarily want to tease that out. That often feels very fractious, but the truth will always win in the end. This is where you see a lot of the one campaign, which was a campaign to end poverty. There was a right thing to do. We should be, and they realized that when they went in there, and if you want to have a look at the one campaign, the history of it, they realized actually we need to not just have this Puritan view of how to do things, but we have to also be respectful of the group and the culture that sits in, and fracturing different groups and things like that, and the third mindset that we're about to look at was really important. But these guys are purists, right? They have a purist mindset, which is great. Like it's not wrong. None of these tribes are wrong. In fact, it's the working together of these tribes that you get the best outcomes, and which is the big learning. But you'll notice a purist or is often triggered by people overlooking how unique they are. They quite, in a strange sort of way, they're the ones that hate this the most, because it's putting them in a box, and they don't like to be put in a box. Or if you ask them to do something that's contrary to their values, if they're part of a political group or some sort of group, whatever it can be, in all stripes, whether it be from the conservative to non-conservative spectrum, if you ask whatever their values are, if you ask them to do something against those values, they will trigger. And they really hate people who seem to change their mind based on social pressure. That just seems to be really, really quite weak. So, and we're continuing, for those online and seeing the stream, we're continuing to troubleshoot. So stay with us while we try to do that. If the worst case scenario, we'll be able to send you this video later on. You'll be able to see it in the video form as well. But the third group is the authoritarians. And authority to a group or a purist is often a dirty word, because authority and power and things like that, it's seen to be either fracturing or is the use of the abuse of that sort of power, sort of use purity and all that sorts of things. But for the authoritarian, it's just the way that it works. It's not a good or a bad thing. It's a hierarchy. As social animals, we are organized, and we organize each other into hierarchies. Our family has a hierarchy. Our friendship groups have hierarchies. And it's no wonder that our organizations and our political systems have hierarchies, right? So we work as hierarchies. That's how we think. So knowledge and data are really critical, because in order to work in a hierarchy, to have the data means that it's not a personal thing. So you can have a database conversation and be able to influence that hierarchy and go around the power tribes without it being a real problem. In fact, you'll climb the ladder through the knowledge and data. So this is the way authoritarians view how they keep them safe. This is how we survive. All right. So it's not about what people think is right. It might not be what I think is right. It's just what's the data saying. In the group, you say, well, the data could be wrong. We're stronger together. And the Puritans go, well, no, the data's not telling us what's right. The data's been wrong before, so we need to go with what was right and what our values are. And so you can sort of see how these worldviews start to are in conflict with each other to a degree. But these worldviews are developed as a way, as a society, for us to thrive. So it's actually the interaction between these different worldviews that is actually really key. The question is often, which worldview are you, and which worldview are the people that are around you? The authoritarians, we talk about power and a hierarchy. The courtrooms are built by an authoritarian. Instantly you can see who's the important person, and that they give hierarchy, and the way that it's positioned is very, very, very intentional to automatically give a sense of hierarchy and control and power in that situation, even to the extent that the jury is set up, even though they have no positional, social standing. When they're in the courtroom, they know their position of authority, as does the person that's being accused. It's a great example of how these things come out in architecture. But triggers for authoritarians: being blindsided without a contingency. That really triggers an authoritarian. Having tech issues and not having that extra button that we can press. You can tell that Rochelle and I aren't really authoritarians, because we're like, oh, well, we'll sort it out, see how we go, right? But people who ignore or misrepresent data, particularly in a decision-making process, that just seems ignorant, and they're dead to them, and it'll trigger them in a very authoritative kind of way. And authoritarians also, like, if they help someone, it's almost like there's a ledger, and then when they need a favor and the other person doesn't do it because it doesn't align with their values or the practices of the group, they're like, I don't care, I did you a favor, it's your turn there's a ledger there, right? And so authoritarians will get really triggered by doing something for somebody that's not returned when in a time of need. So the real question is, which one sort of resonates with you? And I often think, think of the person that you struggle to connect with, and think about, well, could they just be looking at the world at an unconscious, reactive way, as a survival way, in a very different sort of worldview? So the groupie, the strongest, most unified win. Is it about the protection of an ideal, or is it about the protection of knowledge and data? And these are really interesting interconnections. But remember, this is our reactive state. This is where we're at our most unconscious, not our most conscious, right? So this is happening in the background all the time. At a cultural level, there are cultures. The American culture literally was a Puritan, founded by Puritans in terms of the modern day culture. In Australia, it was a very authoritarian culture. And in places like Ireland, it's a very groupie culture. So looking at culture and the way that you sit and interact with other different cultures, China is a very authoritarian culture, etc. And the way that it interacts, and we can go into this and pick at this. Trust me, I can do hours and hours on this, right? But the point is that you can have an organization that's got a culture, and that they're within the broader context of culture. And you think, when you work with a team, you go, we just didn't fit. Often it's because the culture of that team sort of is misaligned with your own way and view of seeing the world. So we tend to select and look at teams and feel connected to teams that have our same group mindset. So when you talk about diversity of teams and recruiting for diversity, you actually want these different mindsets in your team. But it takes social intelligence to then be able to work with those teams, so that you're not just reacting to other people, and you can actually take that other worldview and sort of play with it and turn around, and not have someone else's worldview trigger you in an unhelpful way. So that is the reactive side. So now when we start to look at the more responsive side, so this is when you're more consciously looking at it. And a good differentiation here is, when you're reacting, you tend to be one of those groups. You tend to be one of those buckets. You can kind of have a shadow of another bucket, and that's true, but you tend to sort of, your survival intent tends to be in one of those buckets. When you talk about this more responsive behavior, these are more learned behaviors that sort of layer on top of it and give you a cognitive skill. What's your cognitive skill? Where do you thrive? And you can be a little bit of all of these. So it's not as sort of discrete as the reacting buckets. And the idea is that as we grow up and we mature, we actually start to develop, at least recognize these. But there'll be one of these where we can do without a lot of energy. So when I'm a groupie and I'm an activist, we're going to go into what activist is. So when I'm in around other groupies, I'm able to work in a groupie kind of way, and I'm being the activist, playing the role of the activist in that group. Then I'm in my thrive state. That's just me thriving. I can do that all day, every day, and it's not going to drain a lot of energy out of me to be in that space. It's going to give me a lot of energy, right? But we'll know this, and we're going to go through the areas. But the other thing to keep in mind, you'll see that the activist and the strategist here in this diagram are the same colors, and the implementer and the partner are the same colors. And that's because they tend to be the master and the mirror of each other. So if you've got a strategist, you tend to be able to understand the activist more easily. And if you had to play a role, you tend to there tends to be your mirror. And when you're under stress, which is different to being triggered in a survival instinct kind of way, just somebody just pissing you off. When you're under stress, it's your mirror or the actions of the mirror side of you that helps to mitigate that stress to put you back into your mindset. And so if you're an implementer and you like to do stuff and you're under immense amounts of stress, sort of too much stress, there's that stress curve where you go too much stress. So Rochelle is actually an implementer. A lot of what I need to do is just for her to know that whatever she needs, I'm here for her. Sometimes it's about getting out of the way and just letting her do stuff. But she knows that it doesn't matter what happens, what the outcome is, we're solid. That nothing's really going to be there. And it gives that safety for her to then go and do. As an activist, when I'm stressed, I often need to step back under stress and go, okay, what's the plan here? What's the strategy? How are we actually going to get to the end goal? And that mitigates my stress and vice versa. We're going to go through that a little bit in step by step. You've also got this learned behaviors, cognitive bias, and that whole self view. And again, going to go a little bit later, but that's all where trauma and experiences and things like that look at the degree to which these things have an impact. It's kind of like it doesn't necessarily change your reacting group or where you are responding, but it definitely changes the degree to which that reactivity evidences itself. So that can be really interesting. It also creates all sorts of fractures. But let's have a look at this responding side, right? So, an activist. I'm an activist, right? This is me. I like to when I listen, I like to make sure that I'm facing really active. This is engaging. This is answering people's questions of why we are here. What's the purpose? What's the deeper driver that means that we get up in the morning and that we even exist in this space? Like, I'll activate that. And from a strategic point of view, it's like, where do we want to go on the hill? Sure, this is what we're doing now, but where are we going? What's that thing that we want to get to? How are we going to change the world? And that's really what activist does. And I'll sit there all day. The problem is, at some point, once you activate it, you often need a partner to come in and just go, well, that's really cool. Who are the people that we need to connect with? And so partners are great natural connectors. They tell stories. They're personable. They're the guy that you want to have a talk to the pub, and they do things really easily. And they sort of find opportunities through partnerships and networks without sort of even trying too hard. But the activists, we think we're connecting with people, and then people go, oh, that's really interesting. I get it, but I don't feel it sometimes. And so the partners do a good job at connecting with people at that empathic level, and do it very, very naturally. The strategist, once they've got that light on the hill, the strategist loves to go, oh, I can see how to get there. I can see all these different opportunities. I can see at a higher level how we map through the valley to get to the other side. And that's a real strategist, how we win. It's the overall level, which is different to the detail. So Rochelle's an implementer, and I think sometimes implementers make the mistake of thinking that the tasks and actions are the strategy, right? Because it feels like you're doing in the moment. Similarly, activists and strategists get so caught up in the strategy and the overall strategy that they never actually do anything, right? So this is the problem. You need somebody who's really good at this implementation to make these ideas real. It doesn't make it any... That's just the way that it works. So the fact that Rochelle's is an implementer with a shadow of a partner, and I'm an activist with a mirror or a shadow of a strategist, we work really well together. This is a really good thing. We're both groupies, so at a reactive level, we kind of understand it, even when we're reacting to different things. We can sort of pick it through and go, I understand that, right? It's not like completely foreign. Yet at the same time, when we're in our thrive state, we're doing stuff, and when we start to work together in a really cool kind of way. But it helps to do this. It also means, though, that there are times when I need to jump out of my activist and go, I need to learn. I need to strengthen those partnership muscles. I need to strengthen those implementer muscles. This isn't just wow, there's an implementer there. You can do everything. That doesn't work like that, right? It's how do you how do you do it? And an activist and an implementer are both doers, and a partner and a strategist are often more thinking, and they're more thinking styles. So as you mature, it's about actually exercising these muscles and practicing it so that you can sit in each seat. It's just that you'll find it easier to fit in one of these categories. So that's kind of that. The learned behaviors and the trauma. So to the extent that you're a groupie and the fracture of the group is seen as an issue, if you've got something that a salient example of a relationship that has blown up, fallen apart, and you've got a narrative in your head that says that confirms that, the nature of that reactivity is going to be so much stronger. And there are other cognitive bias things that are more likely to be salient as well. Purist, if you've got a value that people haven't lived to their values, and it's had a really negative impact on them, you can imagine how that those learned behaviors and for you. So for we're both groupies, but I have a much stronger fear of rejection, so I can't really help that. That's just what it is, and so I have to look at that. But Rochelle doesn't have that same sort of fear, so it doesn't respond as much, even though we're both groupies. Rochelle's got her own little unique set of things that as we all do. Like, this is not about demonizing that or being scared of those things. It's about being able to see them and ask that question, why, and using that pain or the pain of reactivity, and we're going to go into something else a little later, which is interesting, as a little spotlight to start to go, how do I do that? How do I better control myself against that emotional intelligence thing that we talked about in the earlier webinar? But also then starting to go, how do I make sure that I navigate other people in a way that doesn't unnecessarily trigger them into that space and looks at their thrive space in a meaningful sort of way. So this is how it sort of all fits together. It's complex, but this is part of
and added to that complexity, and that some of these learned behaviors come from some of your societal norms. So remembering that, if you belong to particular groups, if you belong to a particular religion or a sporting group, or you follow a team, there are things and behaviors and morals and rules that you learn by being a part of a group. That we're all humans and we all like to be a part of tribes, and there are ways that you interact that's appropriate in that tribe in order to be included and successful. So these all inform. So it's not just about how your brain works, but it's also about the influences externally that influence the way you might react to things, and the things that you might think are immoral. And some of the social intelligence here comes from about being aware of that, and being aware of, yes, this is about how they like to think and the logic of how they think and how they might react, but it's also about respecting maybe their culture, their belief systems, and often that can be different to your own. So being aware of your own and where you stand, but also being able to be thoughtful about the learned behaviors and self-view and environmental impacts, or that worldview that people have, is a way that you can demonstrate social intelligence.
Yeah, and understanding that social identity, that's what they call it. They call it social identity. And if you want to look into it, there's a guy called Alex Haslam, who I studied with in my undergrad course, who is one of the world's preeminent masters in this, and has some great thinking, and he's a genius. But so when you're looking at identity, the way that you can use that in that social context is by making a particular identity more salient in either yourself or someone else. So I'm a cricket lover, I'm a psychologist, I'm also a father. If I can sort of bring one of those identities to mind. If somebody's attacking me as a psychologist, I can think, I'm a dad, I'm an older guy. Maybe there's something there that I can sort of see that person through the eyes of the fact that I'm a dad, or through the eyes of the fact that I'm an Australian, right? What does it mean to be an Australian, and how does that change the way that I think? But I also, if I know that I need to talk to Rochelle in a certain way, Rochelle is a mum, Rochelle is a learning and development expert and professional, Rochelle is a incredible leader of teams, and is an implementer. All of these things are little identities that I can raise in her to say, look, as a mum, what do you think about this? As a dad, thinking of ourselves as Australians together, thinking of ourselves as Decider. There's an identity for us that comes with the company that we've built, or the product that we've built, Switch for Schools. They've all got different identities, and that's how you can start looking at the social interaction. It's a higher order interaction effect that you can start to look at and think at. It's about thinking about what's happening in the other person. What's the identity that sits there? What is the identity that they can hold?
So what I'm doing now, I've just put a link into LinkedIn, to the LinkedIn chat, and I'm just, or Gemma, I might get you to add one to YouTube for me, please. You can take the survey. We have a free, it's 17 questions, really quick and easy, and it will give you an insight into your strengths and weaknesses and where you fit on that map in the Slade decision-making framework, which you might find really interesting. So have a go at doing that. All right. So what, as I said, so first step is about better understanding how our brains work, how we interact, how we interpret information, and what we do with that emotionally from that perspective. But one of the other key elements of social intelligence is about having really strong relationships. And the way that you supercharge that is a few things that we'd like to go through today. So I'm going to start with my first tip about building better relationships to be more socially intelligent, and that is about being conversationally aware. Brendan, who's on the line, will attest to this. We had a manager a long time ago. His name was Cal, and he is one of the most socially intelligent people I know. He has an ability when he's talking to you to make you feel like you're the only one that matters. When he, and he can adjust that depending on the circumstances where he is. But if we were having particularly a one-on-one where I was trying to work through a problem or an issue or my goals or something that I was trying to achieve, he was in, and he was all in, and he was listen, and you knew he was listening. He was showing the right, he was present. He wasn't checking his phone. He wasn't watching the time. Often meant he was late for meetings, I might add, but that's a different issue. But he was there, and he cared, and you genuinely knew that he wanted the best outcome for you out of that conversation, and he would provide really thoughtful, considered responses. So he was not just listening to what I was saying, he was listening to what I needed to hear from him in that moment to serve me better, to help me progress, to help me do. So he was conversationally aware. He knew what was going on, and he was paying attention enough to interpret the meaning, not just the words.
And that's that partners are very good at this, right? I know Cal not as well as you guys know him, but I know knowing Cal enough to know he's a partner. Like he's got that muscle well and truly built. And so this is about, me as an activist. I go, I need to work on being a partner, because this is something that's really interesting about being conversationally aware. If you're in a group and you've got a partner, maybe sometimes you need to defer to that person when you're in a negotiation setting or a group setting, because they're going to do it better than you. So just let them do their thing, right?
The next tip I wanted to share is about building effective bonds. So it's, we talk, and no doubt you've heard, be empathetic, lead with empathy, and absolutely, but know that empathy isn't sympathy. It's not just, I feel sorry for you. It's actually taking on a little bit of where they're at and interpreting that and making meaning of it for yourself. So it's trying to interpret what you see and try and imagine and put, you talk about walking a mile in their shoes, is that really try and be empathetic to their situation so that you can mirror what they're feeling back to them. That will, when you can be empathetic and they feel that they're not alone and that they are supported, then they will trust you faster. So when we talk about mirroring at a lower level, so for example, if somebody's grieving, of course, you're not going to, start sobbing and grieving as well, but to be supportive for them, you want to be a little bit disappointed. You want to be a little bit, oh, that's really sad. I'm sorry for your loss. It would be inappropriate to go, you'll be okay. And, try and just inject happiness in that moment, because it's disingenuous. And if anything, it might even break rapport and trust. You need to just support them in the moment that they're in with a little bit of what they're feeling right now, because that way they will feel that you're on their side, that you've got their back, and particularly useful for groupies. This is really important. And this is for all of the various different emotions. So if someone is furious, if you can be just a little bit annoyed for them too, go, hell yeah, that's really crap. I can't believe that happened. And how dare, you will build rapport a lot faster with someone if you can just, same if someone's feeling overwhelmed, if you can just be a little bit concerned too and go, yeah, I can see how this is really concerning, and we need to do something about it. Just that ability to mirror emotion at a lower level. You don't have to take on the intensity of the emotion, and that's not what we're saying, but we're just saying if you can connect faster by empathizing, deeply empathizing with where people are in that moment.
And you can learn this. This is the thing. People either think that they've got a natural gift, and to a degree, if you're a partner, you will have exercised this a little bit more. But no one is unable to learn this. We've worked with people with spectrum disorders and done a lot of training, just basic training, because this is not about what you can do. This is about what the other person feels, right? So it doesn't matter if you actually feel what that other person's doing. This is about the other person feeling like you do, and that's a really significant difference.
Building rapport. And the other one is about being a positive influence. There's this interesting thing in psychology where we talking about that mirroring emotion. So, for example, if I'm frowning and I look at Phil frowning, he is, even for a microsecond, he's going to try on that. He'll frown to kind of go, oh, you're frowning. What is that? And then his brain will interpret what that means. So that attaches to this mirroring thing. So if you position yourself by being happy, then you'll create a more positive environment. And when, it's, yourself, you don't want to surround yourself with people that are negative and draining all the time. Being socially intelligent is about being respectful and about, being the positive mood in that environment. It will assist, I assure you.
And it's funny because my thinking face, when I'm thinking, looks like a frown. Like I'm just thinking and I'm thinking, and people are going, you're really upset at me. You're being scary. I'm like, no, oh my God, I'm just thinking. Like that's my thinking face. So I've almost had to really change my thinking face, because that's about that being aware of the impact that you're having on others in most of those moments. It's also me when I'm in the reverse of that, not taking somebody's thinking face.
Well, when I've got resting bitch face, that's not a cue that
I didn't say that. I own
it. It's fine, whatever. And the last one, I just wanted to just go, and this is a great one to try and attempt to do. And what I'm not suggesting is that you interrupt people. What I'm suggesting here is that this is a great way to assess if you are fully present in that moment and have aligned your thinking to where they're at. If you're in a position that you can start to finish people's sentences, that you can predict what their behavior, reactions, and what they're saying is, then this is how you know that you are attuned to what's going on for them in that moment. So it's a great little technique that I use myself to
make sure that other people understand what's going on around them and that you hear them.
Just like that.
How about
that? Oh, we're funny. So, I mean, we've talked a lot about that sort of one-to-one or one-to-small group and being present, connecting relationships, but there's also being conscious of how you connect in a socially intelligent way publicly, and particularly this day and age, social media being so public.
We see this like there's some real interesting, with the social intelligence, maybe social media intelligence should be a whole different thing, right? But it's actually not. It's just it's a less nuanced environment, but it still follows the same sort of rules. How do you look at social intelligence when the risk of being vilified because of a certain position or certain belief is so salient, right? Now, the Oxford Manor is a really good way to remember to do some of this, right? Because Oxford's been around for more than 1,000 years, right? And throughout its history, there's been times where if they had a different view to the current view, either religious or political, literally they'd get killed. Like people would come up and chop their heads off. So they thought, we'd like our heads. We'd like to be able, but we really need to be able to tease through these ideas. And so they came up with this Oxford Manor. And the Oxford Manor, as Oscar Wilde sort of put it very well, is the ability to play gracefully with ideas, to listen and nourish different points of view in a measured and respectful way, right? This is what social media is lacking. This is what social media doesn't do this very well, right? Because people don't do it very well. They have what's called a first chair conversation. I feel this. I believe this. This is what's right, and I think this. And then someone comes back and says, it's all first space, first chair, they're called. And every now and then somebody tries to pull out of that and go, well, what do you think? What do you believe? What do you want? And we call that second chair, second space, because you're going outside of yourself, for someone else's point of view. But that doesn't, all that says is elicit someone else's first chair response, right? So it's kind of still doesn't really kick it out of that space. And some people do that in order to intentionally kick someone into first base, right? The Oxford Manor is about a third space. So it's not about what do I believe. It's not about what do you believe. It's about it. It's about this thing that's sitting out here, and we're going to have a look at this idea and turn it around and inspect it and interrogate it, so that you should be able to talk about a concept without anyone actually knowing what your opinion is, and you can talk about it. And you think, yeah, I reckon I can do that. It's really hard. Could you imagine posting something on social media about all of these issues without people knowing what your own point of view is? That's really, really hard, right? Because social media is tuned to your first chair, always first chair. Let's talk about gender diversity, for instance. Somebody came to me and we're in an open forum. So it wasn't social media, but it was a big open, very, very similar. Like the tweeters were there. If I said something wrong, it was going straight on Twitter, right? So I almost had to respond as if I was responding on Twitter, right? In my head. And they said, look, there's been a bit of controversy about religious schools being able to discriminate based on different points of view about sexual and gender diversity. What do you think about that? So that was them trying to elicit a first chair response. So what do I do in that situation? And I said, well, it's really, really, I find this whole thing fascinating. It's really curious because you've got multiple sides and multiple points of the conversation. So you've got these people that are sitting in religious circles that say, on one hand, Jesus and it was a Christian context they were talking about. It's all about love and loving the neighbor and accepting oneself. And Jesus definitely didn't care what someone else's, sexual history was when, with the people that were around him. And other people that go, well, this is about, what's right and what's the law and things like that. And they've got a lot more conservative approach. But then you've got people that are in a non-religious setting just saying, look, people should be free to be able to train their children up in the ways that they feel is important to their kids. If you don't want to do that, don't send your kids to that school. Why is that such a big problem? And other people on that says, no, any sort of discrimination is bad, etc. And so I answered that, and by the end of it, they go, that's really interesting, and they maybe thought about it in a different sort of way. But I in no way allowed them to be able to say, oh, you think that, and sort of turn into a fight, because being into a fight is not helpful. And this is what even contentious issues that sit within married couples, we often say, in couples counseling, we talk about better relationships. When you're in that fighting space, no one wins there, right? You need to be looking for peace. How do you create peace in order to create playfulness, in order to create grace, right? And if you can't create peace, if you can't look at one of these conversations and create peace through the conversation, that's the Oxford Manor, and be able to tease things out in an intellectual and meaningful and meaty way still without that. And I suppose what's at the heart of this is that people are scared to either be offended or cause offense. And this is not necessarily helpful, but you need to know how to do things in a way that doesn't cause offense without being intentionally scared of being offensive, if that makes sense. It's kind of a weird sort of thing. And then if you're offended, use that as I'd like to go, well, why is that offending me so much? What is it in me that is offensive? Why can't I just hold someone else's point of view as a point of view? Why is it riling me up? And that's a key to social and emotional intelligence.
So we're almost out of time, and thank you for your patience with our technical issues today. So let me just wrap this up. So what are the key takeaways? Please, to be socially intelligent, you need to be aware of yourself and you need to manage your own reactions. You need to put your own mask on first, but you also need to be aware of the impact. So be aware of the ripple effect, be aware of the impact you're having with those around you, respect diversity and the worldview of others, practice building your empathy muscles, and practice using the Oxford Manor to be able to communicate with respect, particularly around some controversial issues. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to drop you a link to a bit of a self-assessment checklist that you can do. So chew on some of the information we've talked about today, have a look at that and see where you are in terms of building this muscle out. So you'll be able to download it and have a look at that. Maybe, put that into your professional development plan and think about how you want to build these muscles and what that looks like for you.
And I find that I'm like, I think I'm proficient, and then after a few whiles, I go back and say, use this over time.
So hope you've enjoyed the information we've given you today. And we're super excited about the next module that we'll be doing next month.
They will have no tech issues whatsoever.
Oh, far out. Don't even. So we'll be looking at bullying and workplace psychopaths. It's going to be a really interesting conversation as we look at that and that culture and those behaviors in that environment. Yeah. And we hope that you can join us for that session. You can find more details on our website. Thank you so much for coming along and participating. We hope you got value, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
See you, everyone.